So hello everyone, I'm Rachel and a very warm welcome to your Midlands Analyst Network Huddle. And for any new people, we hope you'll find these huddles useful by sharing skills and learning from each other's knowledge and experience. And it's also a great opportunity to hang out with like-minded people. And if you're here but not yet part of the Analyst Network, or if you'd like to be, just email me and you can join in all the programs. Just going to work out who's not on mute, because obviously I haven't gone through that aspect of the housekeeping yet. But if you aren't on mute, if you could just do that now, that'd be wonderful. Anyway, thank you ever so much for coming today. It's great to see you all, especially as we are competing a little bit with the AFA conference, which I thought was up the road in Villa Park, but I understand it's going to be online now, but it will be just as marvellous as it would have been. And I'm now less worried, now I know it's online, that Andi was going to be in two places at once, because he's very much here with us today, and he's going to be on the panel in a moment or two. What a talented guy he is. So in today's huddle, we have an excellent panel who are going to be discussing the Goldacre review. So does the Goldacre review make health research and analysis better, broader and safer? So we're going to be handing over to Simon in a moment or two, but before that, if you could just go over to menti.com, and if you could type in the code 85231122, just put that in the chat for those who can see it. So that's 8523 1122. I'll just share my screen so you can see it like that too. And then we can just find out just a tiny bit more about you, so we know who we're talking to, who's in the room today. We've got lots of people here already. That's lovely. I'm feeling the love, guys. I'm feeling the love. So, very important question here. The sun is shining, or at least it was here in Stafford. I haven't asked you about your holiday plans for quite some time. I'm really interested to know who's going where. What have you got planned? I'm planning, I believe, to go to, oh, well, I've just been, oh gosh, New York kind of is different from Cornwall. I'm going to Cornwall. I'm going to be camping in Cornwall. Just bought one of those blow up tents. So we'll see how that goes. If somebody waiting to come in? I think somebody, if you see somebody waiting in the lobby, just let them in. Everyone's welcome. All right, what have we got? Yorkshire, lovely. Oh, Whitby. I love Whitby. I've been there. Someone else is going to Cornwall. Basingstoke. My favourite. Absolutely. Lake District, Malvern. Venice. Very nice. Canterbury. I've been there. Yep. Wonderful. Dubai as well. Wow, loads of exciting places. Is anybody doing anything different from normal? Is anybody? I haven't asked you that question. Oh, Cornwall is in the lead. Cornwall's in the lead. I might meet you all there then, whoever's going. Okay, just moving on quickly. So, who have we got here today? If you could just say what your job is, what your role is, that'd be great. So we can find out. I'm betting Analysts is our popular vote. It should be on the Midlands Analyst Network. I'm surprised if it wasn't. But I'd just like to see who else is there as well, because we do have a range. We cover quite a range of jobs, and we have people who have a sort of an analytical role, but it might not be in their job title. And we have people who lead analysts. Again, they might not be in their job title. So lots of analysts, lots of public health analysts, information analysts. There'll be a data scientist there. There's a few data scientists there. That's great. Fabulous. Okay, and just lastly, before I move on, if you could just tell me which organisation best describes where you work. So usually we have it's close between local authority and I think we had quite a few CCGs last time. Health Economics Unit, yeah, there should be a few here today, because here to see Andi play his guitar. I mean, take part in the panel discussion. And lots of strategy unit guys. Great. That's good to see. There's good coverage. So we that's again we like to see that. I'd like to know a bit more about the other. I think I got explained to me last time, and I should change the option. So we're including community mental health hospitals maybe. Okay, so I'm going to leave this open here because some people aren't able to see the chat, not able to respond by putting your hand up. So if you do have a question and you can't do it in any other way, for any of our panel members, they would be delighted to respond to them, and you can just pop them on here. But I will, without further ado, I haven't said that for many huddles as well. I would like now to pass over to Mr. Simon Bourne.
Thanks.
Hi, Simon.
Hello, Rachel. Thanks, and thanks everyone. Lovely to see you all here. Nice range of organisational backgrounds and lots of familiar faces in the room. So I'm Simon Bourne. I think I know a lot of you. I'm Programme Director for the Midlands Decision Support Network. And what we're going to do today is talk about the review Better, Broader, Safer, written by our pal Ben Goldacre. And we've got a lovely panel to talk about it. But we also really want your reflections and ideas. So as Rachel was saying, please do use Menti to offer questions. Later in the session, we'll put a few of those to the panel. I'll do my best Dimbleby impression, and we'll go from there. So just want to summarise briefly to start off with. The main report is gigantic and unapologetically so. It was scope was about, as well as in the title, it's about delivering better, broader, safer use of NHS data for analysis and research. But it's got a particular focus on what are some of the strategic or technical blockers and how some of those might be overcome. It's pretty wide ranging in terms of the people it spoke to. I think a couple of hundred individuals, various focus groups and written submissions. And if I just summarize some of its hundreds of recommendations, I think they focus around 6 main areas. So one is around putting in place platforms as a means of overcoming some of the privacy and transparency challenges that exist in the moment. Another is around adopting open working methods as a means of improving efficiency and consistency. We've also got one around systematic approaches to curation, so curation of data, curation of codes, creation of analytical standards. There's something around supporting data analysts. I mean, particularly in the NHS is obviously the focus of the review. So it talks about creating an NHS analyst service, modelled on similar arrangements in other governmental departments. It makes a number of proposed changes to governance, so simplifying some of the approval processes for gaining access to data. And then lastly, it's got a number of suggestions around approaches and strategy. So it talks about, for example, creating lots of senior strategic leadership roles for developers and for data scientists and various other aspects. So that's really just a high level. There's various versions of the report that you can access if you want to dive deeper, but I just wanted to set the scene before I introduce our panel. So we've got the lovely Andi Orlowski, who's president of the Association of Professional Healthcare Analysts and also director of our lovely sister team, the Health Economics Unit. We've got Peter Spilsbury, who's director of the Strategy Unit. We've got Stephen Wyatt, who's head of policy and research at the Strategy Unit, and also welcoming David Sgorbati as well, who is chief analyst at the Health Economics Unit. So just to start off with, I want to give each of you a chance to share a few reflections, but then after that, just raise your hand when you want to come in, and we'll try and have a bit of an organic discussion. So really open question to start with. I wonder what stood out to you when reading the report, and why? And perhaps I'll go to Andi first, never short of a few words.
Thank you, as ever, Simon. No, and I think this is, an excellent report in general. And so in 2020, at one of your own meetings, you had Simon Stevens come here and at the Midlands Decision Support Network, talking about the high quality analysis that the analyst community were doing. In 2021, Amanda Pritchard said, a good analyst can save more lives than a good anaesthetist. And of course, we've known that for years, right? In fact, our work, affects not the lives of a few, 100 individuals or even a few thousand. It's tens, hundreds, if not millions of people with the amazing analytics that people do to push resources and direct care in the ICSs, the regions, in the hospitals. And so I think that this review is incredibly timely, that builds on this kind of, I'm hoping, this sometimes newfound, but in most cases, a reborn positive reputation that the analytics community has got, which has been built out of, I believe, we've built this, we've forged this as analysts from the COVID response. And it's this idea of how we have worked as a community to come together, to problem solve, to have people, when COVID first broke, we were at Imperial working with the strategy unit, working with the Health Foundation, working with NHS England and some of the hospitals up north, all of us working together, using a shared platform like Futures to share some of this knowledge. And I think the one key bit that really comes out in the report, and of course, we'll talk later how somehow this causes a bit of tension, is his acknowledgement of this kind of grassroots organizations that have appeared and where communities of analysts have worked together and in a true spirit of camaraderie, looking at problems, looking at and sharing solutions. And I think it's his acknowledgements of those grassroots organizations. So of course, naming AFA, and of course, I'm very, very proud, not that I can say that I was president of the organization when he was doing the review, but there's amazing stuff that AFA have done, but also very, very importantly, the NHSR community, which again gets a shout out. These are organizations that need funding, and I think have had a fundamental role in the work that we've been doing. And again, they both, and especially the NHSR community, express many of the things that he calls out for about sharing data, about being open. So for me, the one standout bit that I got really excited about was his shout back to these grassroots organizations, and fundamentally the way we feel about analytics also pulls through it.
Thanks, Andi. That's really helpful. Peter, could I go to you next? What stood out to you when you were looking at it?
There's lots to like in the report from my point of view, but I can't help look at a report like this from a sort of organisational political level, and I'm slightly fearful as a result, because the report's massive, and it's so massive that I don't think most of the people who will cite it in support of things they try and do will have read it. And that worries me, because I'm already hearing I've already been in conversations where people are saying to me, we can't do this, it's against the Goldacre review. Well, what does that mean? Because the review covers, it kind of covers so much stuff. But anyway, but we can come back to that. But of course, I love the stuff around the idea of the reproducible analysis. I'm a bit worried we're creating a whole new jargon to go with it, but the basic principles of using open source analysis, some of the things that underpin our thinking about the Midlands Decision Support Network, where we can see real opportunities to get collaborative working and some genuine scale benefits through sharing. So I'm very excited that it reinforces that. I'm disappointed that he didn't mention the Midlands Decision Support Network in his report. It wasn't for lack of being told about it. And he should have had a closer look, because it does exemplify some of the things that they recommend in the report. But anyway, so, those things are good. Trying to find a new way to cut through all the nonsense about data is good, though I'm not sure whether I'm perturbed by how certain they are that their recommendations are the right ones. to be honest. But anyway, those are some thoughts. The only other little thing I thought we should clock, which is a really useful device when you write a report like that, I don't know if you noticed it in the introduction, is it talks about how complicated it is. So it says, so the one thing we have done is we've written a really clear report. And it's a great device, that, because straight away it means any confusion is the responsibility of the reader. So I'm going to use that in all future reports.
Excellent. So some excitement, some enthusiasm, a bit of some concerns about it being used as a sort of shorthand to justify anything, but also some nice writing tips in there as well. That's good. Thanks, Peter. What about David? Would you mind coming in, please?
Absolutely. So before I joined the NHS, I worked in the exciting, dynamic environment of startups, where there was a strong, very, very strong culture of sharing code and, forking each other's code, so duplicating each other's code to improve on it, having a clear audit trail of where code comes from and why it was written a certain way. So the fact that the review includes some of these practices, the fact that it suggests ways in which we could better share some of the great work that is happening across the NHS is something that I very thoroughly enjoyed. There's also one of the recommendations really stuck with me. It's about the culture of making it okay to ask for code, and that's something that really clicked for me, because it is something that is very natural from the environment that I come from, and it is something that will make us stronger. So that was one of the top things that stood out for me. But also, I joined the NHS in 2014. And when I joined, I did find myself a bit disappointed by how I felt analysts were not very well integrated in how the NHS was working. I felt that some of the relationships and some of the ways in which we interacted were not optimal. So once again, I strongly welcome the emphasis on professionalization, on senior leadership, technical senior leadership, on continuous development. So there's plenty to like there. There's a lot of about infrastructure, which I think is strongly necessary. Although I do have some concerns about how some of the suggestions about infrastructure are put forward. I think it's always very complicated to decide how to approach the strategy and how that strategy will fit in the broader cultural context. We have a patchy history with the National Programme for IT, and then with different clinical systems of sometimes trying to restrict options and sometimes stepping away too much. And I feel that the report goes a bit back and forth in terms of what it's suggesting. I tend to be in favor of strongly regulating standards. So having a strong set of standards that platforms need to adhere to, and then allowing organizations, ICSs, regions to build as long as they follow those standards and that there is correct interoperability. What the report, I think, is a bit more restrictive in some of its suggestions. And last thing I wanted, well, sorry, two more things to mention. I just wanted to talk about, the report also talks about IG, and I strongly welcome that. I'm going to make my first controversial statement of the day here. I love IG, and by that I mean I love good IG. So when I can have a good conversation about what I really need to do to support decision making, and I speak to a good IG person that allows me to safely do what I need to do as an analyst within an ethical and legal framework, I am happy. I think, as the report suggests, some things need to change. Once again, I think the report maybe I think there are ethical and practical complexities that need a bit more unpacking. For example, the conversation about data controllers is very, very complicated in terms of the relationship between the public, the GP, and the analyst. So I think we need to look at that as a whole chain rather than saying, oh, maybe we can just cut out a lot of controllers. And last thing, somewhat echoing Peter's suggestion, if I'm going to make a recommendation, I like it to be very actionable. And maybe it's not so much the report, maybe it's the marketing of the report. A lot of headlines said, this is a great report. It has 185 detailed recommendations. Maybe I'm just not smart enough. I can't hold in my head 185 detailed recommendations. And I think the actionability of a report like this is quite important, and maybe it's not quite what I would have hoped in some ways. But despite that, I still strongly welcome any report that helps us grow as a profession and be stronger. And I love this profession, so anything that helps us move forward is great from in my books.
Thank you, David. Really interesting reflections, and yeah, some good love for IG there. You don't see that very often. So look at this. The skepticism on Andy's face is oh wow, you could cut it with a knife. Stephen, I wonder if I could invite you in. Is there, you've heard from your fellow panelists. Is there anything different that stood out to you, or any sort of key reflections you want to share? You're just muted at the moment.
It is an unusual report in the sense that most reports of this type either try to nail the vision and set out what the future might look like, but leave the details further to work out afterwards, or they tend to focus in on a particular aspect and make some specific recommendations on that. And this does try to do both the vision and the detail, and that's what makes it such a challenging read, I think. And there aren't many people who would attempt such an undertaking, I don't think. But this is Ben Goldacre, who single-handedly took on the pharmaceutical industry in his mid-late 20s. But I suppose the challenge, which I think is what Peter and others are talking about, is about where do we go from here? It's set up all the questions now. It's raised all the issues that we've been trying to raise, incrementally over the last few years, and more. It's far broader than I think anything we've ever, thought about before. But the next stages will be critical, because whoever gets their hands on the implementation task is going to set the tone for all the work we do for the next 10 years. And that can go well or it can go badly. And I think we have to step into that space and make sure we stand up and be counted at this point now. We want to be, all of us on the call today, we should be involved in making sure that translation of this vision into something that's a practical reality is something that we're actively involved in, rather than something that comes down and is done to us. So that makes me nervous at the moment. I think we're in that middle ground now. All the questions have been raised, and they've been raised at the most senior level they could. This has gone to the Secretary of State. It's the first time I think we've had this sort of attention for our discipline. And yeah, it's good that all those issues are raised, but it's precarious now, I think, because it really could go either way depending on how it's taken forward from here, I'd say. Thanks,
Stephen. That's a noted portion, and I like the way that you've described the report. You're right; it does sort of stand alone, and I sort of struggle to think of much else that's similar to it. I wonder does anyone want to come in just to respond to what they've heard from in terms of those opening points? Did anything particularly provoke a reaction in you, or you want to build on or disagree with? Just raise your hand. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, it's good to see Ben in the audience. No, he's not. People were just slightly worried there when I said that. I think it's a really difficult area, because and I could say something here that would probably ruin the rest of my career in the eyes of some people, but I'll say it anyway, and that is that from my perspective, most of the analytical advancement in the health service over the last period has come despite the system rather than because of it, and we've had the potential. We've had a national organisation for a decade that could have taken on leading the development and enhancement of NHS analysis. But maybe I'm alone in this, but I haven't seen that as being a result of national activities. And therefore I worry that when a report gets written that proposes various national solutions, the way those national things could, it's Stephen's point really, the way those national things could be put in place could be the way the NHS often does stuff. And we could suddenly find that we've recruited someone in from Rolls-Royce or Amazon or something to be the head of the profession, and that we've recruited some external consultancy to set up X, Y, and Z. Failing to notice some of the really fundamental and quite hard-hitting points that are in this report. You know, there's some very juicy bits in the report about the failure in how we've employed external analytical consultancy, all the pitfalls that have come from that. There's a lot of stuff in there about making very sensible points about there's a big difference between generic skills and generic skills applied within the context of understanding of NHS culture and specifics and data realities, and therefore the need to draw on people within the service who've got skills. There's some very hard-hitting stuff about that, but I fear that will just get ignored, and that some of the other recommendations will be given priority without those elements. So and perhaps I shouldn't be fearful, but it's just observing the reality of the last period from my perspective that makes me a bit fearful. So I would hope, and I think it's picking up Stephen's challenge, that where there are good things going on to try to improve, I'm particularly on the analytical development side of the report. The stuff, the elements around data, I don't regard as my area of expertise. So I haven't got so much to say about that. But I would hope, in terms of the analytical development side of it, people will look at what's happening and try to support and invest in some of the horizontal initiatives, as I describe it, that are going on, rather than think the right answer is to drop something hierarchically on top of it. I'm not sure the answer for any of us, unless you know, it's one of these things. If we could recruit them, we might agree with it. But you know, this idea of a group of very highly paid senior people who are suddenly anointed as being the head of profession a head of profession will only work if the people in the profession look to that person and see them as fulfilling that role personally and in terms of their skills and capabilities and so on. So and to date, the NHS doesn't seem to typically appoint people to head up departments based on deep technical expertise. So I think it just needs some. I'm nervous about it, but you know, but as everyone said, it is useful to have these types of reports to draw attention to some of the issues.
That's a useful reflection, Peter, and I think definitely speaks to some of the tension in the report between the sort of top-down as opposed to the grassroots elements that we were talking about at the start. Andi, could I bring you in there?
Yeah, and it's to that point there, Simon, and I think, and also Zoe's comment in the chat, and I think that. You know, that
just to point out, I don't think everyone can see that. It might be worth reading it out.
Okay, so Zoe points out that that do people think that grassroots efforts are showing that there is a lack of leadership in the profession that analysts are having to fill, and should this be seen as a failure rather than a success. And I think that, well, when you look at the report, it's a real crowd pleaser. Yes, as an analyst, and still, you know, to Peter's point, I am the worst analyst at the health economics unit. I think it's well known. I wasn't hired for this, but I still try my best. And but you know, as an analyst, there's loads of stuff in here to like, and there's loads of things I feel very strongly about. You know, buy it once for the NHS and make sure it's then procured for everyone to use. The code that we buy, if we're buying an analytical tool, should be open and everyone should be able to see it. There's no black boxes anymore from private companies. And so we can evaluate if the algorithm's working. There's, you know, let's say there's the stuff it talks about sharing culture and all those are all very, very positive. And he sings the praise of grassroots. But then to suggest the government statistical service type thing. So if it's going to be an analytical, so if it's going to be an NHS statistical or analytical service, you know, what has come from the centre that we all, you know and love? What algorithms, what way of working, what bits have we done? Or has all the best practice been shared in forums like this, where we can see people's capability? And you know, I still work at NHS England, maybe not for much longer after these talks, but about how we engage, you know, how the centre engages to commission externals to be able to do this. And by externals, I mean NHS organisations and people like the Strategy Unit and Health Economics Unit and others. I mean, there's some amazing work being done at BNSSG and, you know, the great guys at NOTS and others around the country. How do we, you know, if we centralise that or, you know, try and force that in the middle, will we be able to attract those people away from that job? Because many of us do it because we feel that we can make a difference. This is the saving more lives than an anaesthetist, right? We don't do that if you're sat in the centre saying this is how we should go about something. So I think that that's where, for me, the real tension lies. He talks grassroots. He talks a great game for analysts where we find it all very exciting and it says all the kind of stuff I want to see. But then I think a bit like Peter and Stephen mentioned, there's this horror of, is this all going to be centralised and pushed upon us? And then who gets to control that? And then who of us would want to be, you know, head of profession? I think we should get Stephen up there. Come on, Stephen. And it must be about time. But there are people we look up to, and there's people, you know, that we very much trust to do the stuff. But would they be attracted into those roles? Would they be attracted to work in the centre in the same way?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Stephen looks pretty enthusiastic, so I'll forward his CV. David, did you want to come in now?
Full disclosure, making myself extremely unpopular here.
Go ahead.
I have to admit, I have spent a good amount of time working in the centre. I have been a very well-intentioned person. I swear I had all the best intentions, coming up with grandiose plans and trying to push them down. Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned, but now I've seen the light. I dread the idea that this could become as well something pushed from the top down. Now, with that said, and wholeheartedly agreeing with what has already been said, I also do think that the centre can have a role and should have a role in supporting us, in helping us identify best practice, helping us, give us ways, places, communities to share best practice for ourselves, to bring us together, to help us grow individually and as a profession, but also to raise our profile in the eyes of the rest of the NHS, because I think it's quite important to that relationship of trust between the analyst and everybody else, all our clients, if you want to call them that way, that they recognize that we are working hard to raise our skills. We know what we're doing. We want to have these conversations with you. We want to understand what you need from us. And we want we want you to trust us. And I think that by having the centre in a way, giving us, as I said, these spaces, that might help us come together in a more visible way.
Thanks, David. Does anyone want to build on that? So I'm hearing, you know, there's that dread of the centre taking over and trampling over what maybe is, you know, happening at grassroots level, but also maybe a recognition that there's a role to play for greater standardisation and some of those aspects. I wonder, does anyone have any thoughts about how do we square that circle? How do we not lose the benefits of either approach?
It's a real tension, isn't it? Because we can all look at that future that Ben Goldacre describes and say we'd love to be there. We'd love all those tools and the platforms and the ways of working and the accreditation of roles, and we'd love it all to be there today. It'd be great, wouldn't it? But the journey from here to there, you know, that's what I'm worried. That's what we're all worried about, isn't it? What will get dismantled or disrupted? That's well and working in the meantime. And as we get there, and I'm just thinking about Zoe's question as well. So it feels to me that if we look at across our patch, it does look as if people have been stepping up more and more into this space, trying to work out how to shape the analytical profession, trying to take it forward. It feels like there really has been sort of a groundswell over the last 2 or 3 years. Things have really moved on. Lots and lots of people involved and lots of people making their own steps and own journeys. Great teams developing. It feels like we've been in training for a big match that's the date hasn't yet been set, but you know, we were imagining it's a few years in the future and we're all getting ready for this. But the Ben Goldacre reviews kind of just brought the date forward for that match. It's kind of saying we're going to have that conversation now, and people will be stepping into this space to make decisions about how to implement this in the near future. And I don't think we can be in training anymore. I think we kind of have to be match ready now. Otherwise, somebody else will be on the pitch and we'll be the substitutes. My analogy breaks down there, but that's where I think we are.
Oh, I like it, Stephen. That's doing well. And you've got a sport obsessed panel who I'm sure will be able to take that and run with it, if you'll excuse the pun. Okay, no. So I mean, any other panel members want to come in there? Do we have any suggestions or reflections as to how we step up to the plate? God, too many sports analogies. Peter, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't kind of really going to get.
No, it's fine.
I suppose what I was going to try to ask if we could talk a little bit about the trusted research environments.
Sure. Basically,
because I don't understand. It's not my thing. I don't understand it. But I think if Ben Goldacre stood up and talked about his report, he would that would be the top of the list of things that he's saying he's recommending, followed by the kind of ubiquitous adoption of RAP. And I think, I mean, if you look at the terms of reference in the report, there were quite a lot of lines in it. And the last line was, how do we improve analysis in the NHS? Now, he's written some stuff about that, but I'd be intrigued to hear from my colleagues really what they think about the trusted research environment thing, because I seem to recall when Open Safely got going and asked for people to engage with it, we kind of said, oh yeah, we'd like to, and then they never replied. So I just worry about whether this is just another way to create data monopolies, but one that Ben likes because he happens to have one. I don't know. That's a very Andy, over to you.
Interesting point. I mean, so David, did you want to come in first? And I just to, if there's a point you wanted to make, to call back briefly, and then come back on Peter's point.
Happy for Andy to go first if he has a more direct.
Lovely, very very polite. Andy, go ahead.
Well, on that trusted research environment piece, so for us and for much of the work we do, again, this was music to my ears. We've been faced with endless difficulties in getting access to integrated data sets that were outside of our patch. And once we moved from Imperial, we lost access to Northwest London data set, even though it was the same analysts with the same knowledge doing the same kind of work. And there were monopolies at play, there were politics, we've struggled with access to the wonderful data sets like KID, and there are some great ones out there, SAIL, CPRD, and others, but these tend to be expensive, and there's paperwork with them. And but so for lots of the work we do, the trusted research environment and making this slightly more formulaic and making sure it's more open and transparent about who has access and for this would be wonderful. And I remember when Ben rang me asking for ideas for Open Safely, and we sent some ideas in, and then I got another phone call from him about a week later saying, what's all this back of the drawer shit, Andy? I need something better than this. And he didn't like our ideas. And so even though we thought that cardiovascular disease, and funnily enough, the work that we have now taken on menopause was knocked back as not being particularly, one of the key drivers at Open Safely. But again, it's for us, it talks very, very strongly. But I also know that representing our members at AFA, that this is not the kind of work that the vast majority of analysts do. They already have access to the data because they've got a reason to be there. The IG supports them. And I saw some amazing projects as part of the Dolphin Awards. If you do get to join AFA and see some of the amazing stuff that they're doing across the country tomorrow afternoon, and also some of the work that the analysts are doing for Analysts of the Year. None of these guys were using trusted research environments, but yet they're using, excellent software. And I know the report also talks about making sure we have access to that software and those bits to make analytics, again, more shareable and more open. But, I don't think TREs talk to us all. And I think that maybe 85% of the work that analysts are doing across the NHS doesn't really require this kind of work. And I think that we sit in a lovely little privileged bubble most of the time at the Hugh and maybe to a lesser extent another organisation similar to ours, where this is very important to us, but not to most probably the vast majority of my members at AFA and for the work that they're doing there. So as you say, for him, research is all. He's done some amazing stuff, and he's now built the first national trusted research environment that has all of primary care data in. He did what CareDot data couldn't do, and what we recently tried to do with the patient data last year, where NHS Digital again crashed and burned on the approach there. He's managed to do it. And of course, I'm sure he desperately wants to keep hold of that. And again, for good reason, yes. And the more that data's out there, the more exciting stuff we can do. But again, I'm not sure if this applies to most of the analysts that we're working on, who are working, supporting the trusts, the ICSs, not just with performance and operations, but also with pop health and beyond. They still don't need a TRE. They just need access to their data for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andy. David, did you want to come in there?
Love the idea of TREs. I think it speaks to me. I love the idea of being able to access the data that I genuinely have a good reason to access with a very transparent audit trail, so that there is clear accountability and in an environment where I have access to the right tools. So mega thumbs up for the concept. As has been pointed out, it is culturally very different from a lot of what we do in the NHS. And for many analysts, it's a very different way of thinking, and this suggests maybe, if I interpret correctly, not appropriate at this point in time, or maybe it will take some time. I've been in the situation even maybe a couple of years ago of having to make some hard decisions about which technology to use. So I was running a very large project, and absolutely something that should have been done probably in a Python environment, but I needed to work closely with the regions, and I ended up we ended up as a team just defaulting to big, old, clunky spreadsheets because we needed to work fast. We needed to work with analysts that needed to access data in a certain way, and that was the best way to solve the urgent problem. Connecting this conversation about theories back to the point that I wanted to come back to, that Steve made earlier about implementation. So theories, as I was saying, great idea. I like it. I want more. Implementation is not going to be easy, I think, especially if depending on how we go about it. There is one line in the report which I've written down somewhere that scared me a little bit. So it says that they are hard work, but they have an extremely high return on investment. In analytics and in digital, we have made big mistakes for many, many years now, going around telling, hey, yes, we're going to do this technical work, we're going to do this piece of analysis, great return on investment. That has often not materialized. And if we are not careful in how we pitch those conversations, going down that rabbit hole, I don't think is going to serve us very, very well. For me, often the conversation about digital technology and analytics should be about what value we're going to add to the patient. And often the excessive focus on return on investment can work against us. Just one last point I wanted to make on theories is the report as a whole also has strong cross-cutting themes around strengthening the relationship with academia and changing our relationship with commercial partners. And it sees theories as a part of changing those relationships. Now, I strongly welcome both strands of change. I think I would love for academia and the NHS to be stronger partners, and I do strongly believe that the way we work with commercial partners is not always right on many levels. And I do feel that theories can play a very strong role in those sectors.
Thanks, David. So I think I'm hearing then, appetite for the concept, potentially though perhaps a little bit of a disconnect between the realities of what frontline analysts need for their day-to-day jobs, and maybe a risk of potentially overstating benefits in terms of return on investment and maybe raising expectations unhelpfully. I'm just thinking in terms of our remaining time, I think it might be quite nice to draw in some of the questions and comments from our audience. And Rachel, maybe you could chuck a few our way. I'll just maybe start with Jack has put something in the chat around how we shape the implementation of this report. I've heard from all of you some concerns about how this thing is implemented. Does anyone in the panel have any suggestions or thoughts as to how this wider analytical community could start to shape this thing being implemented? Massive victims, some massive centralisation, or something which we feel it doesn't help us.
Well, part of the report asks for more funding for organisations like NHS, Our Community, and AFA, and and of course that he may not have mentioned the Midlands Decision Support Network, but I think you've got an incredibly healthy and wonderful community here. So part of this is rather than funding and giving some wonderful grade inflation for all these VSM2s that that would be in the centre to become the professional heads and a whole infrastructure around them, could we not use that money to support these local communities to feed into a group who then represent them in the centre? And there are groups like that. And I think So one, to ask for funding for more groups like this, to hear those voices and to make sure they're heard, to Jack's point, to make sure that they understand the bits that we really do like and the bits that we don't like and why not. But also for us as analysts to make sure we are members of these groups. And so every week or every 2 weeks, whenever we have a huddle, to make sure that we are huddling and sharing for people to join AFA, to people to join the NHSR community, so they understand that there's these organisations do represent the memberships, and I mentioned at the beginning of the AFA my AFA talk, this idea of being that first follower. Yeah, it's that TED talk with the guy dancing at the festival, and he's kind of crazy and out there, and everyone just thinks, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. But then he's joined, and very quickly there's hundreds of people all dancing, and when you all thought this was just going to be an embarrassing video of this man dancing, not that it might be someone who dances like me, but we need to be those first and fast followers. Yes, and we need to be, and it's a time now for the community to very quickly, let's get together, make sure that we're at the Midlands Decision Support Network, make sure we're signing up to AFA, all the branches, and make sure that they represent you too. And how do they have your voices? And then use those voices from those organisations going up. And wouldn't it be great if everyone had their version of the Decision Support Network? We had 5 of those across the country, or 4, whatever the right number is, all feeding through. So I'd be really encourage everyone. So yes, we can ask for funding. The report says, or the review says, we should get funding, but all the analysts right now should be thinking about how they join NHSR. And Zoe's put a link in the chat, and we'll share it around afterwards. But also AFA, your AFA branches, and other chances to be able to engage.
Thanks, Andy. And Stephen, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, just to say, I think there is a bit of a trap for us here if we're not careful, which is that, my guess is that on 80-90% of what Ben's aiming for would be things that we would have said ourselves if asked, and because of there will be some differences, and because we're worried about how it might get implemented, we want to make sure we don't get seen as that person who's holding things back. Having wanted progress on this for so long, we don't want to be seen as the people who are chipping away at the report and undermining it, because we'd all see the benefits if we could get to the sort of vision that Ben sets out. Certainly the vast majority of it, and I think Andy's spot on. The way to the route through is to use all the networks that we've been building over the last 2 or 3 years. To really capitalise on those now, and it does mean that those networks have got to stand up and be counted and play their role. But I think that's the route. There's individual action we can all take, but I think that the sort of collective action that Andy's outlined is probably the way we're going to have the best chance of getting the future we want, and the journey to get there, which is compatible with what we want in the next sort of few years as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Really valuable. Peter, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a danger, isn't there, that this discussion about not liking national imposition just ends up making us sound like Luddites. I think there's a lot of interest in things like decision support network approach, not just in our region and elsewhere. And I think maybe our opportunity is to be much more forceful or explicit about describing how those arrangements can take forward the agenda that's set out in Goldacre's report. There are some quite practical things we could do. So, we've described in setting up the Midlands Decision Support Network, we made some statements at the beginning about how fundamental the use of open code was, and how a very important part of our vision was the opportunity for analysts to share their work so we get scale benefits. We've probably got to push that harder now. And, given there's now a terminology for it, RAP, maybe we've got to start building elements into the education programme for the Midland Decision Support Network so that every analytical team working within the Midlands as part of our network feels confident that it can work to the principles of RAP. You know, I think we could pick some of those things and say, yeah, actually we're motoring with it. For colleagues who don't know, we actually have got interest from all the ICSs in the Midlands now. The leaders, the AOs and the chairs have signed up for a 2-day residential thing in September, including some of the stuff that Goldacre also recommends, which is that leaders need to start engaging in how they get trained to work better with analysts. So we have got a community that's signing up to that. So we need to push that harder, publicise it, offer it as a national pilot for how to do this within the context of a locally owned arrangement. So I kind of think that you know, after moaning about it a little bit, the way to go with it is to find all the ways we can accelerate its progress constructively. And I think we've got a very good platform for that now. We just need the ICSs to get their teams in place, but that is happening.
What about just? I'm mindful of our time, so we need to think about drawing to a close. But one of the questions that's come through in from the mentee is around you know, the fact that the scope of the review focuses on NHS analysts. Do we think there's sort of a lot more potential for sort of broadening that to you know to have a far more sort of broad definition of analysts? I know, for example, this Huddle, you know, a lot of the biggest single staff group from local authorities. Does anyone want to respond to that?
But just to say, Simon, absolutely. We talk about integrated care. We talk about working together. And yes, this is yet another big finger up to our friends in local authority and all of those other professions where we know that we've learned so much from them over the recent years. Certainly I have in my work on pop health management, and absolutely they need to be involved. And I know that this review may talk about NHS analysts, but I'm sure that he tends to mean or should have meant healthcare analysts across the board. And you know, how can we work with local authority, our friends in public health, you know, social community, you know, and of course, you know that we're trying to push for wider determinants to be included, and there's a whole load of stuff that we can do with justice, DWP, education, beyond.
Thanks, Andy, and I'm really sorry we've not had more time for your questions. We've got a wonderful talkative panel and a not particularly good timekeeper in me. But you know, this is really just the start of the conversation. I think is what I'm hearing. You know, lots of a few concerns, as we've said, some concerns around the tension around localism and centralisation. But also lots of things that excite us. I think an appetite for us for the panel anyway to be involved, to use these local structures like these huddles, like you know, like AFA, like the MDSN, in order to feed into shaping this thing, so that we don't just sort of become passive recipients of whatever comes next. So I like. I like the idea of inviting Ben to visit the MDSN and some of our huddles as well. He's previously visited and taken part in Insight, and so I'm sure he'd be delighted to come again. So nothing more from me for now. I'm mindful of our time, so perhaps I'll hand back to Rachel to close the session. Thanks,
Simon, and thanks very much everybody on the panel for having that discussion today. It's been really interesting. You must be honoured guests, because we are 2 minutes past 12. That doesn't happen. So thanks very much for your contributions, and let's hope we can turn this into something positive. I think we've moved from the beginning of the session to something that we really want to see the benefits and the positive impact of this review, and let's keep going with that good sentiment. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see everybody else in a couple of weeks.